rather not bore everyone on that status. But yes, my name is Adam Lee. I'm the Director for Emergency Management and Organizational Resilience for Memorial Hermann Health System. Does everyone know of Memorial Hermann to some capacity down in Houston? So we are technically a 17 hospital system. It's 14 acute care sites and 3 joint ventures, hitting 17. We have 2 rehab facilities, about 260 what we call like ambulatory sites, so our clinics. So you go to the doctor's office at a clinic, that's not at a hospital. That's what we call an ambulatory site, so like our OPIDs, our outpatient imaging, some of our breast screening centers for cancer, sleep centers, list kind of goes on. So how we're set up internally, and then I'll talk a little bit about myself. So we currently have the director position, which is myself, and then I have a medical director that we kind of work in tandem with one another, Dr. Ferguson. Under me, I have 1 manager and 1 emergency management coordinator, and then we have 2 planners, one which is also an alum of Sam Houston State. And then after that, we've got about 50 people out at the campuses that do emergency management and preparedness activities. So depending on the size of the campus, those could be either full-time positions or they may be other duties as assigned, where you're doing another job function in tandem with that current role. So in my kind of role and what happened is in 2016, I'm originally from Wisconsin. I did my undergraduate studies in Missouri. Then I came to Texas for graduate school, where I met Dr. Denham, Dr. Jones, Dr. Lumberg in the security study program. I had no idea what I wanted to do. The path was always law enforcement in mind. Then I had a class with Dr. Denham, and she talked about emergency management. I can tell you right now, growing up, my dream was not to be in emergency management. I didn't even know it was a field as a child. So I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'll learn more about it. Throughout studies, I ended up getting an internship with Harris County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, where I was there with another Sam Houston State alum. His name was Benson, and he kind of showed me the ropes of stuff. From there, I got my first real job, because it was a paid job. It wasn't an unpaid internship. So I got my first paid job with the city of League City. And the theme of this entire talk, in my opinion, is throughout your entire career, you're going to have opportunities that either go your way or they don't. For the ones, some of them are, you can control the outcome because you can put in extra work, you can work a little harder to dictate that outcome. Some of it's just out of your control. Thus far, I feel like everything has kind of fallen in my direction. So I went to League City, and I got to learn because Harvey had just occurred, and my boss went on paternity leave. So it was an office of 2. So I had no choice but to learn. The entire premise of this was going to be, here's kind of what's going on. I'm going to go on paternity leave. You'll learn, you'll get your support. We'll come back and kind of figure it out. So I did that. I got to work on Harvey recovery. And when you're in the job search, I'd say take what job you can get that makes you happy, but avoid disaster recovery. It is my least favorite thing in the world, but some people love it. And after that, I got a job with a position called, or a company called CETRAC, so Southeast Texas Regional Advisory Council. And I went from being the Assistant Emergency Management Coordinator to training and exercise. And this was 2 months, 3 months before COVID came. So this was my first real inclining into healthcare, where I got to learn a little bit about healthcare. At CETRAC, what their role is in the state of Texas, we have what are called regional advisory councils. And they get funding from DSHS, Department of Health and Human Services, who gets funding from ASPR, which used to be the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness, and it just changed to the Administration for Response and something. They just changed their acronym, and they got pulled out from the CDC and became their own federal entity. So they get funding, they give it to DSHS, Department of Health and Human Services, who gives it to these entities called RACs, Regional Advisory Councils. And they're over what's called, even more confusing here, trauma service areas, TSAs. And there are 22 TSAs in the state of Texas. And then all the TSAs roll into a RAC, and the RAC does all the healthcare preparedness for that region. So CETRAC is a 25-county region stemming from Matagorda Bay over to the Louisiana border up into Nacogdoches. So we got there was about 160 hospitals in that region. Well, COVID came. So my job in training and exercise kind of came to a halt, and I worked a lot in the planning section, doing just planning activities. And one day my boss came to everyone in the company and said, hey, we're trying to collect data because the county judges want to know the COVID cases from healthcare, and we collect the data, so how can we present it? Anyone know how to do that? And I said, I can do it. She said, okay, Adam, go do it. I said, okay, what am I going to do? So I go to YouTube. And I spent some time on YouTube. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to use my network because I have a guy's number that I lived next to my freshman year in college who I remember, just a factoid that has stuck with me, that he did some Excel competition and he took second. So he's got to know how to use Excel well. So I called him and said, hey, will you teach me how to do this? And he did. We started there. So we're working on this. And then we realized that our data set was getting way too big to be doing this in Excel. So we said, so I went to our IT director of the company and said, hey, what options exist for software that are out there to do this? He said, I've heard of this thing called Power BI. I don't know what it is, but we can figure it out. Him and I literally spent 1 week together, sleeping minimally, learning Power BI, where I just took a data set online and took it apart and put it back together so I could figure out how they built their data set. And he did the same thing. Before you know it, this data set was used at the governor's office and used by the coronavirus task force at the White House. And the first time I got an unknown call on my cell phone, it was the medical director for the Department of Homeland Security. And I was like, yeah, right. So that just kind of spread. And then I remembered, okay, we've got this data set, so what can I do with this information that we have? So I reached out to Dr. Denham and said, hey, we'd love to publish on this, but I don't know how to do that. Will you teach me? So we ended up publishing 2 articles. One of them is with the Wessex Institute of Technology, and one of them is with the Journal of Emergency Management. And we actually we were supposed to be in person, but COVID kind of ruined it, but we spoke virtually at a conference, the International Emergency Management Conference in Rome. So I really would encourage folks, remember the people you meet in this room today, because you don't know how your paths are going to cross in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And don't burn a bridge with your professors or anyone else here, because they are a resource and a lifeline to teach you things that you don't know you need yet. So that happened, and at this time I'm working with a lot of the hospitals, and I said, you know what is my next career move? What does that look like? And I called the person at Memorial Hermann, and I said, hey, can you just give me what's the lowdown, how do I get your job? That's what I want to know. I want to know how I get your job. And her response was like, oh, what perfect timing, because I'm actually leaving my job. And I said, really? So when is that happening? And she said, I literally just put my notice in. So I said, okay, I'm going to apply for that job. So I applied for that job, and I got that job. So I was hired as the manager for disaster preparedness. And then after 1 year, they created the director role and promoted me into the director role for emergency management and organizational resilience. So what does this look like? And that's just the quick overview of kind of my career and what's happened to me personally. But what do the careers in emergency management look like, and what do you do? Just like any, I think, one that goes to school, they're thinking law enforcement, and if they're in the CJ building, or they're thinking some federal entity of any type. Is there anyone in here that was like, I want to be an emergency manager? But don't be lying to me. You are? No, that's great. So very few people actually want that role to do it because they don't know of it. It's relatively new, and it's a shift in the field because it used to be heavily former law enforcement, former fire, former EMS, former military, retired military that have transitioned into a new role, and they've moved into this. In the recent times, I would say there's a little bit of a split where you're going to talk to people that either are looking strictly from an academic standpoint that want experience from academia, or they're looking for more so folks that have an extensive career in a first responder agency. But we're starting to see that shift as we look to professionalize the industry and set standards for it, to move towards the latter in terms of trying to get more folks education and formalized training. So the three kind of buckets of jobs that exist to date are your public jobs. So your city, your county, or your federal type job. And then you've got your private bucket of jobs, which are going to be your oil and gas, your healthcare, your critical infrastructures, right? Wastewater, public works, those emergency management buckets. After that, you have consulting. I've worked in 2 of these buckets. I've never worked in consulting, but I've heard great things from all 3 of them. I've heard the pros and cons of all of them. Actually, someone that I graduated with, 2 of them work in the consulting space, and they seem to really like it. This is where I would say, if you like to travel and see lots of places, consulting is your gig, because you kind of go where the disaster happens. And then you'll be there for an extended period of time, and then you'll go somewhere else, and you'll kind of rotate. And some of the companies are international companies, so you can go abroad and do things like that. But the consulting bucket of jobs, you're going to do a lot of disaster recovery type work, and then there are also those organizations will like go to get grants, and then you'll work wherever that grant needs you to for your skill set. The private sector jobs, again, your critical infrastructures, they're more frequently coming up. The problem with the private sector jobs is I could have 30 people in this room that are my equivalents in healthcare and outside of healthcare, and we all have a different title. It could be director of preparedness, emergency manager, business continuity manager, business continuity director, the specialist, but yet they're at a director level, a planner that's at a director level. So the list can go on. So that's where we talk back to the professionalizing the industry, so that there's a set of standards and what that is, and what the types of positions that exist are. But again, in the private sector, you can call something whatever you want it to be in your organization. And it doesn't really mean a lot if the job description doesn't necessarily support the things that you're doing. And then in the public sector, you've got the 2 biggest employers in our region, the 3, Harris County, City of Houston, Fort Bend County, and then all of the cities within those jurisdictions, for the most part, have at least one person that's designated as an emergency manager. So, like I said, I worked at Leak City originally. They've got people in Galveston County. Oh, that's another big employer, Galveston County. So if you think all the big counties in our region down here in Southeast Texas, Walker County's got an emergency manager. Is it still Butch? It's still Butch. So Butch Davis, that's what it is. Butch Davis is the emergency manager for Walker County. And then they'll have a planner, training exercise coordinator, specialist, CERT coordinator, any variation of those positions at the public realm. The other thing too, it was very difficult for me to get my first job because I met my wife when I was here. And she said, under no circumstance are we leaving Houston, Adam. And I was like, I mean, if that's what you want. So it was harder for me because opportunities came up, but they were in Philadelphia. They were in Wisconsin, making that up, California. So I wasn't willing to move. So that limited my pool of jobs that I could look from initially. So a few things that I would recommend, if you're looking for private sector type jobs, get on LinkedIn, get on Facebook, and join the groups, because I don't comment. Be careful what you say in the group, because people do remember who you are based on what you post online. But they post the jobs before the jobs are even on the market, so to speak. And as you expand your network, those people will remember you. And I think there's one really prolific thing too. When I went to get my job in CETRAC, knowing I didn't work at healthcare, I happened to be at a meeting with the leaders of CETRAC, and I just went up and I introduced myself, because I told myself, hey, what is the worst that can happen? They don't hire me. I said, hey, my name is Adam. I just wanted to introduce myself. I applied to a position. I wanted to be able to put a name to the face. I got an interview. Who knows if it was because of that or because I was qualified. I hope it was both. But you just take that shot. Prior to this meeting, there was one student that reached out to me and said, hey, I will be there tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to learning from you, essentially, right? And I ain't going to call her out in here, but that is one student, If she applied to a job, I would remember her, right? And I'm not going to say every person does that, but when I hire people and have a position open and have 100 applicants, I can put a name to that applicant now, a face to that applicant, because I've seen her. I remember she reached out to me, and it's not even the message so much as she made an effort, and I actually looked at her LinkedIn profile, and I was like, okay. So I guaranteed if I saw that name come in across the desk, I would be able to put a face to that. Now, I'm not saying, please, I've also had the inverse of this where people have messaged me on LinkedIn and they're like, I see you're hiring, but I don't want to fill out the application unless I know you're going to hire me. That will do the opposite effect of what you think it will. You'll probably not get even an interview from that. So that's the spectrum of like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there in a respectful manner and say, hey, I'm going to be there, whether they reply or not. I'm going to be there, and I'm just looking forward to this and want to learn from you as a leader or as an educator or whatever that is. So kudos to that person for reaching out. And now to talk a little bit about emergency management, and then we'll go into any questions. And at any time, folks, raise your hand, ask a question, and I'm happy to answer them. But in terms of emergency management, so where did this whole thing come from and why is it needed? So in the 80s, the National Weather Service started tracking the cost of natural disasters. Who can tell me how many disasters we've had in the United States since 1980 that have exceeded $1 billion in cost? How many? Give me a number. Yes. Over 100. Yep. A little lower than 400, but over 100. Come on, between 3 and 400, someone. Between 3 and 4, you said 350? A little higher. No, I know you said 350. A little higher. 380, a little lower. 373. We've had 373 natural disasters that have exceeded $1 billion in cost in the United States since the 1980s. Now let me pull up my factoid so that I don't get this wrong here. Of that, how many of them were in Texas? What percentage? 45.6. So almost half of the natural disasters that occur in the United States happen here in Texas. The other half, anyone guess? What state? It starts with C and ends with California. California, yeah. Now think of the wildfires that occur there, right? Almost every year. So there are states in between that obviously have natural disasters, flooding. They had flooding in Kentucky was it last year or 2 years ago? And there are things that occur that exceed that monetary value. So of that 45.6% in Texas, how many do you think have occurred since 2010? Remember, we started this tracking in the 1980s. And since 2010, we have had 148 of the 170 natural disasters that have exceeded $1 billion. Now you say, wow, that's a lot. But $1 billion isn't a lot of money in terms of infrastructure, right? You take any building this building that we're in today, if this building got damaged by a natural disaster of some type, I guarantee it would be pretty expensive to replace it. It may even be close to $1 billion in and of itself. By the time you factor in just total damage, all of the equipment that's in here, everything that comes from that. So of those 148 that have occurred since 2010, how many have occurred in the last 5 years? 50% of them. So what is that telling us? Disasters are increasing in frequency and they're increasing in severity. Hence the role of the emergency managers that exist in the private sector and whatnot to protect that financial and the assets of an organization. And we can argue till we're blue in the face on what the cause of the severity is and what's causing this, but not really the intent of today. And then on average, in the United States, in Texas alone, on average, we'll have 3.9 natural disasters per year that exceed $1 billion. Now, remember, we've got those wildfires too up in the Panhandle area that we don't always think about, and there are things that happen throughout Texas. So on any given year, we'll probably have close to $4 billion disasters in Texas. Now, keep in mind, some years we only have 1, and other years we have 6. So law of averages, they all weigh out in the end. And then just the last point to put here is that, no, that's good. So that's why emergency management has kind of become a thing. Now, the healthcare setting. How many folks in here have read 5 Days of Memorial? Oh, stop it. So if you're a reader, I'm not a reader. If you are a reader, get the book 5 Days of Memorial. If you're not, sign up for your free Apple TV account and watch it on Apple TV. That's the only place you can watch it. It's 5 episodes. But what it does is it looks at Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath of what happened to Memorial Hospital there. And that really sets the stage in 2005 and on for my types of roles that exist in the emergency management. But the essence of what happened is 5 Days at Memorial, the hospital staff there had to come and take over and take care of a skilled nursing facility in New Orleans. That was on their property, and they weren't equipped for it. They didn't have the resources to handle patients, and they ultimately, the physicians there had to make decisions on what patients lived and which ones died, all because of a lack of preparedness. And it goes through the whole spectrum of leadership decisions along the way and things that occurred there. But the book is better than the movie, or better than the TV series. The TV series is for the ones that don't read, like myself. So pick your poison, but I highly recommend it if you're interested in this line of work. You have to watch that as just a staple of what to do and what not to do. But at current moment, do we have any questions? You want this job? You have a question. What do you think the greatest risk to healthcare is in terms of my line of work? What do I prepare for every day? So what are my day-to-day functions? Try not to be sued. I mean, that's the lawyer's job. But yes, that is fair. I don't want to be sued. But in terms of like a natural man-made disaster, what is the disaster to worry about? In my opinion. And I'm not, let me back up. There's a difference too, my job title is misleading. What's the difference between an emergency and a disaster? Disaster is something that's rather infrequent and has the ability to impact our entire organization. An emergency is something like a heart attack. It increases in frequency, a bus crash, a trauma, a large trauma event. That's an emergency, right? So the disasters are the things that have the ability, like an Ebola outbreak, that has the ability to have massive consequence. So that is a disaster. So in terms of disasters, what is the number one thing you think I spend my time on? It starts with cyber and ends with security. Cybersecurity, there we go. Cybersecurity, in my opinion, is the biggest threat to healthcare at current date. So in 2023, how many healthcare systems, what percentage of healthcare systems do you think experienced a ransomware attack where they resulted in an extended downtime? Come on, someone can guess a percentage here. A little lower, by 10. 60%. Okay, so 60% of healthcare organizations in 2023 experienced a ransomware attack that resulted in an extended downtime. So take your current life you live today and take all technology away for the next 30 days. Can you live it the same way? No, right? Now do that in the hospital, where we take all technology away from the nurses, the doctors, the surgeons, the operators, even down to the environmental service worker there that uses the iPad to know which room they need to clean, right? So we take all technology away from them, so how do they operate, right? So this is where business continuity comes in, continuity of operations. So looking at the processes everyone does, and how do we map out a way for them to be able to sustain their operations without using any technology in a technology-driven world, right? So that's not how all private sector is set up. So I actually get to be over the cybersecurity operations. And in cyber response and healthcare specifically, it's in a few different buckets, but you've got your actual cybersecurity team and then your cybersecurity response team. So your cybersecurity team, I think of it like offense and defense, right? You've got a group of folks on offense. They're trying to prevent folks from entering the system. They're being proactive. They're patching equipment, that type of stuff. And then you've got a group of folks on defense, meaning someone has entered the system. How do I cut them off before they can get any more damage into the system, right? Because in the world of cybersecurity, the best practice, for the lack of the better term, is something has happened, hit the red button on the wall to shut everything off. And then, if you do that, you're still talking around 7 days to bring everything back online again. It's not like we can just flip the switch and turn it back on, because you have to go through every piece of equipment to see where that intrusion went to, right? So it's not something where it's just a quick response, oh, we can turn it on and we can operate like normal again. No. So you've got that, and then you've got the operations piece of the cyber response, and then you've got the clinical piece. So how do we care for that patient in this type of situation, and what does that look like? So I own that middle piece, that operations piece. Like, how do we do all of the operational functions we do? You know, do we have the right number of downtime forms for nurses to chart on? And all of that type of stuff is where this role would come into that. In terms of what you can do today, so Preparing Texas. How many folks have a Preparing Texas account? So it's a free account that you can sign up for through Preparing Texas. So you can go to Preparing Texas, sign up for an account. What they do is they post the trainings that are free to folks, students in this line of work to go take, to build those proficiencies. So those could be the Homeland Security Exercise Evaluation Program. They could be ICS 100, 200, 400, or 700, 800. Those are the ICS courses online that you've probably taken. 300 and 400 are the in-person courses that take about a week. So that's one option in Preparing Texas. Another option is they have the Center for Domestic Preparedness, CDP, which is in Anniston, Alabama. You can sign up for classes there, and our folks take a lot of the hospital emergency response teams and hospital incident command trainings, frame trainings there. And again, they will fly you to Atlanta, drive you to Alabama. The only thing that you pay for is your time. So they cover the cost of that. The federal government does to go to the Center of Domestic Preparedness. They've got, what's the one in New Mexico? One in New Mexico, and then they've got one in LSU. There's one in Hawaii, but you do have to pay your travel to go to Hawaii. And then there's one in Nebraska, maybe. But they're free training institutes where the government pays for your training to go. And you can sign up and take those and do those as a student. The other thing I would highly recommend is try to find the opportunity for FaceTime. Your network is your lifeline for a job. And I don't care what industry you're in, your network is your lifeline for your job. The folks you know that will advocate for you for a position will make or break your ability to get a job. Not that you can't just apply to a job out of the blue and get that job on merits alone. I'm not saying that, because that is 100% possible. But when you have the ability to interact with people face to face and work with them, and they understand your talents and skill sets, it makes it much easier to get the first interview. After you had the first interview, now it's on merits. Now it's on your ability to articulate what you're trying to say. It's, did I have typos in my resume? It's all that other stuff that starts to factor into the conversation. But the ability to get FaceTime with folks and meet them and say, hey, I'm a student looking to learn. Don't go and say, hey, I need a job, get me a job. But you approach it as, I'm a student looking to learn. How can I do that? The other thing I always recommend is be a lifelong learner. I credit my current role to the program that I was in, the Security Studies program, the master's program. Because this is the domino effect. If I didn't take that graduate program, I didn't get that internship. And at the time, I don't know if you all know Dr. Dozier, or if it's before everyone here, but he was the internship coordinator. And Dr. Denham had good connections with the county and knew of people there. So again, my network got me the interview. My interview got me the job, right? And that's how it's always going to work for a majority of jobs, unless you're applying for like a federal law enforcement job, a federal criminal justice type job, where it's probably a larger factors, like you got a polygraph, you've got drug tests, you've got all of those things. It's not so much just I need an interview and then I get a job. But what that looks like is you can go to conferences, and there are dollar values associated with some of the things I'm saying, but typically they're significantly reduced. So they have the Regional Healthcare Preparedness Coalition Conference in Galveston every year. It's 3 days towards the end of October. They've got a hurricane conference down in Corpus that's like $40 to attend. It might even be free to students. Don't quote me on that. Then they've got the the TDEM conference, those are reduced rate for students. AHEP, the Association for Healthcare Emergency Preparedness Professionals, is in Dallas in 2 weeks. There's reduced rates for students. But join some of these organizations. You don't have to go to the conference, but what you can do is they'll have webinars, training opportunities. They'll have networking, virtual networking events where you can meet folks and learn folks' name so they can put a name to the face. But questions. Someone's got a question.
So talk just a few minutes about organizational resilience.
Yep. Yeah. So the buzzword of resilience has surfaced probably like in the last 3-4 years to be like a big deal in our line of work. So if you actually looked at Dina Creswell's FEMA administrators' strategic outline of FEMA, it focused on resilience. That was the entire focus of the direction forward for FEMA. So when you talk about organizational resilience and how it comes from Memorial Hermann, I look at this kind of twofold. How do you justify what I call a cost loser to an organization? Emergency management is a cost loser, meaning we don't make money. You don't become emergency management to say, oh, I can charge a patient to have an emergency management program. You can't do that, right? That's not a service. So it's not a cost center in healthcare. It just is a cost center that costs money. We just spend money, we don't make money, unless you get grants or do some other type things on the side. So how do you make money, right? Well, you don't. So how do you justify an organization, right? How do you justify what you do to the leaders? Because most leaders you will talk to, they are very quantitative in nature, meaning I don't want to hear you're talking about an apple and now we got an orange and you're comparing these, right? I want to know what percentage increase or what value did this bring. And then oftentimes you can say, well, we had a disaster and it saved us $200 million because we didn't have as much damage because we were prepared. That don't work. I'll tell you that right now. It doesn't fly. So, any ideas of how you go about justifying what we do in an organization? I'll tie this back in right here. I went with the approach of resilience. How do we go about justifying what we do to have a purpose? So what any leader can never argue with is the company's mission, vision, competencies, brand, promise to the community, right? So I said, looking at our mission and vision and our brand promise to the community, how can I take these principles and wrap them in? And that's where resilience comes in. When you look at what does resilience mean to Memorial Hermann? So we can define a strategy based on resilience using the acronym of resilience to develop competencies that if we meet these competencies, we can say we're a resilient organization because we're taking a holistic approach to physical security, network governance, emergency management, HR, people. We're taking a holistic approach to ensure we have the ability to not only withstand, but recover from these things that happen. So that's kind of like just a very high overarching, my standpoint on resilience. Because lots of folks say, I have a resilient organization. My question is, what does that mean, right? And there's no one answer that fits all for any company, right, or any organization. Every person has their own kind of understanding and definition of what it means. ISO, the International Standards Organization, would argue that there are attributes that if you attain these attributes, then you are considered a resilient organization. And one of them that falls in there is the emergency management as a department as part of that attribute. So I wouldn't say that there's like a specific nomenclature to say this is exactly what it means. The question I would ask is, what does it mean to your organization? It should all generally be the same with maybe a different path to get there, but in the case of us, we're utilizing it maybe as a state to provide, because once we have competencies that fall under, like if I take an E in resilience, that could mean emergency planning. So what falls under emergency planning as a document? Our emergency operation plan, our facility-specific annexes, appendices, right? All this documentation stuff are competencies. Once a campus has attained that, now I can ask a question, do you have this? Yes, no. Yes is 1, no is 0. What have I just done? I've assigned a numerical value to each question. So now I can actually look at every campus or entity in the system to see, we were at a 91 year, we're at a 92 now, we're getting better. So I can go to the leaders and say, you have been spending money to prepare an organization to make it more resilient, and look at the fruits of your labor. You are raising your overall resilience of the institution or of your campus by your investment. Where in the past, it was just always a very subjective thing, like, oh, we bought equipment and did it, but we never really used it, or we never really trained on it. And now we have a quantitative number that I can go to my leader and say, we have gone from a 16 at this campus to a 20 at this campus to a 40 at this campus over time. And there's an actual way to evaluate my performance versus it being just subjective in my word. Questions?
What skill sets are important to employ in emergency?
Good question. So one of my favorite quotes in emergency management is, you have to have a knowledge base a mile wide and an inch deep. What does that mean? You have to know a lot of things at a very minimal level. Meaning, in healthcare, I need to understand how all clinical departments operate, but never ask me to put an IV in your arm, because I will fail miserably, right? But I generally need to understand how it operates, right? When you're doing a business continuity plan, so business continuity is comprised of, obviously, the plan, a business impact analysis, and a business process analysis. And the business process analysis is essentially following a process from start to finish, looking at technology dependencies, looking at interdependencies, and then overall finding, okay, if something happens, what are the workarounds to continue doing this one function in a different way, right? So in the event we had a cyber attack, what's our option to provide clinical documentation if we can't use our electronic medical record system, right? Our option is to go to downtime forms. From there, it's to scan the document, right? So I would say you have to have the ability to learn and be a lifelong learner. So once I got my manager job, I told myself, how can I advance in this organization knowing I'm in a very niche field? It's not like there's thousands of these jobs that are out there, right? So I elected to get my MBA. And I started out, and I'm not sponsored, and I don't receive funds for saying edX here, but I went to edX first. Essentially, I went to school online, found a program that worked for me, and I liked it. And I started there, and then I transferred into the college, and I finished my MBA. And I ended up going to Doane University in Nebraska. I would just say be a lifelong learner, and complacency kind of kills in this field, because as technology changes, as things change, you have to be able to adapt and think critically and not overreact, but yet you truly have to understand the big picture. So bring it back, I'd say being a strategic thinker is probably very helpful here. Obviously, ability to read, write, and talk, very important. I would just say education is power. Education is knowledge, and you're never gonna go wrong with education. So learn. Another question? So in the public sector too, things to attain for, so in the industry, everyone tries to get through the International Emergency Management Association, their CEM designation, which is a Certified Emergency Manager. I would say that is almost equivalent to getting a graduate degree, and I mean that in all sense of honesty. I think it took me 5 years to do it, and it was incredibly difficult. You have to prove 100 education hours and competencies in some different areas, one of them being emergency management, one of them is like a general management, and then you have to hit 6 competencies, which include like publishing, doing like special type projects, taking a competency-based test, which I was confident I failed, but I don't know how I passed that. But that one, it took me 5 years to do that. So that's almost equivalent. And it's not 5 years of working time because like if you're going to publish something, like you got to have the idea and then you got to write it and then it goes through all the review processes before it's actually published. So some of that stuff I started in year 1, but I never truly got to until like year 3 or 4 because I didn't have enough maybe experience or knowledge base on how to go about publishing. So getting your CEM is one. Internal to Texas, you want to get your professional development, or what do they call it, APS, Advanced Professional Series, and Basic Professional Series, I think it is. But essentially, it's a core set of class that if you go on the Preparing Texas website and type in APS, it'll come up, and so the entry-level one, or maybe it's PDS, Professional Development Series is the entry-level one, and Advanced Professional Series is the one after that. Those are options. And then through FEMA, too, you can also do classes for business continuity, and they've got a level 1 and level 2 certification. The level 1 certification is, I don't know what it's called, Professional Continuity Practitioner, and then the level 2 is a Master Continuity Practitioner. So the Master Continuity Practitioner took me maybe 3 years to do because not all the classes are offered frequently. So again, it goes back to the comment of being a lifelong learner because sometimes you'll see a lot of job descriptions that they know in this field, oh, we want someone with a CEM, but maybe the person that wrote that job description doesn't know what getting a CEM actually entails. So it's an entry-level job looking for an entry-level person, but they were requiring a CEM. That's very difficult, right? So, and maybe it's one of those preferred things. So starting to look at some of those things and mapping out if you really want to be in this field, map out early on, how do I attain some of these things? Another thing I did too, and I think we did as a graduate program here, the CERT program through Walker County. So we did the CERT program here and did that. That's like a week-long class where we did it every night type thing. But they have hundreds of trainings, and obviously FEMA has independent study courses. Oh, the other one is EMI, the Emergency Management Institute, which is in Maryland, Emmitsburg, Maryland. Okay, I said that right, Emmitsburg, Maryland. Those are also free classes to go to, and they also have different series that you can complete. So you can do like an exercise, master exercise practitioner, I think it's PPP, the planning practitioner, and there's a couple other ones that fall in that realm through EMI. Anything else?
Just one thing I want to throw out to our students. A lot of you might be CJ majors, but if you're security studies majors, we've also got various certificates we've built into our program. Some of them also did that.
Oh, I can't believe I didn't add that too. The Homeland Security Institute up front yonder here, they do work in the healthcare sector, so they focus on healthcare specifically, along with other critical infrastructure areas. But I would just add that any involvement with them too, any involvement, it's not going to hurt. And I would just leave folks too with the idea of don't be afraid to put yourself out there and introduce yourself to people. It could be the most awkward feeling you have in the world, but just doing it and having the hire manager that has the 100 resumes in front of them be able to associate, oh, I remember this person, I remember their face, that's this name right here. I'm going to put that resume right here, and I'll come back and look at the rest of them. Now, you've just separated yourself from a stack of faceless papers, essentially, right? Now, obviously, everyone uses the systems, and you have to be able to meet minimum qualifications. Like, if it requires 3 years and you say, I've never worked my entire life, you're automatically probably not going to make it through HR. But if you meet minimum qualifications, that's how you separate yourself, is just put yourself out there, meet someone, and have the conversation, especially when we are so technology dependent now and we do everything through Zoom and virtually. It's very difficult to have this type of interaction and have it be meaningful. So don't waste the opportunities and just put yourself out there when you have the opportunity, and join those groups on LinkedIn or whatever platform you use to look for the job postings before they even hit the market. And last piece too, and this is the worst part when you look for a job, you have to tailor every resume. I can tell which resume has been submitted to 6 jobs. And it's not hard to tailor it. You use the exact verbiage that's in the job description, and put it in your resume as it matches to your skill set, right? But if you think that you'll use one resume across every job you apply for, you'll find yourself applying to hundreds of jobs because there's nothing special about what that is. It's not the exact skill set. Like the hiring manager is using the verbs and the words in that description for a very specific reason because they're looking for a very specific skill set. So.
One real quick for the note of the students in the room. We're hoping to set up a student club for Homeland Security that we affiliate with the Institute for Homeland Security. So if you are having an interest in joining and being a founding member of a group like that, that would be a great networking opportunity. I'm sure we'd be able to network you with wonderful people like Adam Lee with our institute. And one of the key reasons we're thinking about that, and we want to get that going, and we're looking for student volunteers to help take that on and spearhead, is because we're getting all these offers for internships, and we need an outlet to be able to introduce students to those internships. So how cool would it be if you were a student leader in one of those groups, and you could be the one who's helping network and contact everybody? So if you're interested in any of that, please come talk to us down here at the front at the Institute for Homeland Security. Myself, I'm Dr. Jones, Security Studies, and Adam Lee, who's the great resource.
Yeah, and you can always reach out via LinkedIn or you can email me. It's just adam.lee@memorialhermann.org. I do my best to reply to every single person that emails me, but sometimes it just takes a little time. So be patient with me if that comes up. But I have a place in my heart for people that graduate from Sam Houston because I do credit much, like I said, the program to a lot of the successes that I've had and things I've been able to do in life. And I, like I said, I hired someone from Sam Houston State early on when I first took over in that role. So I know Katie or myself would always be happy to work with a student in any capacity. You just need to, like I said, make the effort to reach out.